Welcome to another edition of Danny's Hot Takes. Today we'll be reviewing the 40k 9th edition rules, and we're going to go phase by phase. So this review goes over the fight phase. So we'll turn to that, and so that is after the charge phase. The fight phase. Carnage engulfs the battlefield as warring armies meet head-on. Fangs and claws crunch through bone. Blades ring like hammer on anvil. Blood spurts and flesh tears as hate-filled foes tear one another apart.
I believe it's pronounced flesh terrors.
They are good at the assault phase. Sometimes they get to assault more than once. So the fight phase is where your models actually get to fight. The charge phase is moving your models into combat. The fight phase is where they do their big punch up. So starting with the player whose turn is not taking place, so that's not the active player. Players must alternate selecting an eligible unit from their army and fighting with it. An eligible unit is one that is already in engagement range. So whether they have made a charge move or not, it doesn't matter. The person whose turn it isn't gets to choose the first unit. Now there are some rules that are going to trump that. For instance, units charging first. Or charging units fight first. So chargers get to fight before other units. So you do all the chargers before you move on to other units that aren't charging that get to fight. So all your charging units get to fight, and then your opponent gets to pick the first one, and then you alternate between the two players, determining which units get to fight and which ones get to take punches, and then the other units get to fight too. So once you've finished. Once all the units that are in engagement range have fought, or one person, or basically both players end with no units able to fight, then the fight phase ends, and you can move on to the morale phase. So again, charging units fight first. So unless models have a special rule that say they also get to fight first, and there are numerous models in the game that do have that rule, chargers always fight first. Keep in mind, this is important. That units if your opponent's units get to fight first, they will get to choose one of their always strikes first units to fight before one of your charging units. So when you select a unit to fight with, the first step that you make before you actually swing any attacks or do anything like that, you have to pile in with that unit. So that unit moves up to 3 inches. They must end their move closer to the closest enemy model. So each individual model has to move closer to the closest enemy model. Then you make your close combat attacks. So that's the next step. So you get to pick which units get to fight. So that's any model in engagement range and any model that's within a half inch of another model that's within a half inch of an enemy model. So this kind of represents like the first and second rank fighting, but only if the first rank is really close to the enemy does the second rank also get to swing into combat. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If your unit is kind of spread out, or you didn't really make a very good charge, and there's not very many enemies to fight, you may not be able to swing with all of your models. So just keep that in mind. Each model that does get to fight will make its attacks. So they'll use the attack characteristic that's printed on their unit card. Remember that different units have different attack values, and there's also special rules that influence the number of attacks that you get. So make sure to pay attention to that and read your unit status slate. So if a unit has 1 attack, they get to roll 1 dice per guy. If a unit has 2 attacks, they get to roll two dice per guy, and so on and so forth, whatever their attack value is. So before you actually roll any dice, you have to pick targets. So models that can fight have to pick a target that they can fight against. If your unit has charged, they can only declare attacks against models that they have charged against. Or if a heroic intervention was performed and that model made it into combat. So if you charge somebody but didn't declare a character as a charge target, and then that character heroically intervenes into you, you can still fight against them. But if you charge somebody and then pile in and touch another and get into engagement range with another unit, you don't get to fight that unit because you didn't declare a charge against them. So that's one really important thing to remember. And again, An attacking model must either choose a model or a unit within engagement range of them, or within a half inch of another model of its unit that is itself within half inch of that enemy unit. So keep in mind that. So again, you can only really attack units that are within your engagement range, or that half inch within a half inch rule. So when you make your attacks, you also have to pick your weapons. Some models have more than one melee weapon, those blessed bastards. And in that case, they can pick which melee weapon they use. Otherwise, they'll use their normal melee weapon. And if they don't have a melee weapon printed on their profile, they can use the standard close combat weapon. And you can see here that has a range of melee, a type of melee. So again, these are only melee weapons get to make melee attacks. So you'll have to select a melee weapon in order to make those attacks. And then you follow the strength. Usually it's as user, or strength +1, or strength ×2, whatever the weapon stat is, and it'll give an AP value and the number of damage, just like a shooting attack. And so you'll make your attacks as we detailed in the shooting section by rolling dice equal to your attacks value, and then you'll roll and see what with using your weapon skill, if you have to roll equal to or better than your weapon skill value. So if your weapon skill value is a 3+, you have to roll a 3 or better to score a hit. And in addition, it works exactly the same as shooting in that respect, where you also have to roll to wound against their toughness. So you'll compare the strength of the attacker to the toughness of the attackee. And that will determine whether or not you have scored a wound, and they'll take saves. Exactly the same as shooting, except it's close. Once you finish making your attacks, and resolving casualties and everything like that, you'll make your consolidate move. A consolidate move is up to 3 inches, just like the pile-in, and you must end closer to the closest enemy model again. And so you alternate back and forth, and so on and so forth, until the fight phase is over and everybody has attacked, and then you can move right on to the morale phase.